The transmission began with a voice that was not a voice. It was synthetic echo layered across the minds of every human who still lived under the weight of the Dominion. The words were clinical detached. They spoke of integration, of adaptive trials of human youth selected as subjects for advancement. What it meant was simple children were to be taken scattered across alien worlds and left in the dens of predators to see if they would die or if they would endure. Humanity had no choice but to listen and obey. Cale did not understand the message. He was 6 years old, and his memories of Earth were already fading. He remembered the sound of rain on tin roofs, and the laughter of his father, though the face of that man had blurred into dream. He remembered clutching a wooden toy shaped like a plane. He remembered crying when soldiers came in the night. The soldiers were not human. Their armor was black and insect-like. Their faces were hidden by plates of glass that reflected his own terrified eyes. He remembered being lifted, carried into a ship where silence pressed so heavy that even sobbing felt wrong. He remembered the cold chamber where rows of children sat, some screaming, some still, as statues, all boys, all stolen from their homes, their eyes hollow, their bodies shivering in the grip of a future none of them understood. Cale was chosen not because of strength, but because his name was on a list drawn by chance. At least that was what the handlers claimed. The Dominion spoke often a logic of order, yet every act was cruelty disguised as calculation. They called the project the Nesting Initiative. They spoke of observing integration, of measuring adaptive potential, of testing limits. Cale did not know those words. He only knew fear. The ship landed on a world colder than anything his small body could have imagined. Ice stretched across the horizon, mountains clawed at the sky, pale with frozen clouds. He was dragged to a cavern mouth surrounded by tracks larger than any he had ever seen the soldiers push him forward. He fell hard against stone. The door behind him closed with finality. The air was sharp with the scent of blood. Inside the cavern lay shapes curled in shadows. Heavy breathing filled the air, low rumbling growls. Cale froze. His heart slammed against his ribs when the shapes moved the light from outside, caught its eyes yellow with predatory fire. The creature rose, massive shoulders, rippling with muscle, fur black, streaked with silver. Its fangs glistened with the remnants of a meal, bones cracked beneath its paws. It was a Varric, the apex hunter of this world. Cale did not scream. His voice had left him somewhere between Earth and this frozen place. He only stared as the beast approached each step, shaking the ground. The alpha of the pack loomed above him, its breath steaming, its maw wide enough to crush him with ease. One bite, and he would be gone, but instinct ancient and buried deep within humanity stirred in him. Instead of fleeing, he lowered himself to the stone, bowing his head, his tiny body pressed to the ground in submission. The beast halted. The growl rumbled lower, as if uncertain. Cale trembled, every muscle ready for pain, but it never came. The alpha sniffed once heavy breath, washing over his hair, then with a sound like a snort it turned away. The others in the den shifted their positions, curious, but not hostile. Cale was alive. He had passed the test. He did not understand. That night hunger gnawed at him. He watched as the pack tore apart a kill. Their jaws cracked bone, their tongues lapped hot blood. Cale crawled closer. His stomach twisted with revulsion. Yet stronger than disgust was the ache of emptiness. He mimicked them, tearing raw flesh with trembling hands, forcing it down. His body rebelled. He gagged, yet he persisted for survival. Demanded that the predators watched his imitation clumsy, but bold. They did not strike him. Away they allowed him to share their feast. Days bled into nights. The cavern grew familiar. The rhythm of the pack became his rhythm. He followed. When they left, he stumbled through snow behind him. His feet bled, his lungs burned, but he pressed on. They killed swiftly. He learned slowly, but he learned their signals were growls, tail flicks, ear tilts. He studied each one until he could mirror them. The Varric were not gentle, yet they tolerated him, and in tolerance there was acceptance. Weeks later, a storm raged across the mountain. The wind screamed like a living thing. Snow buried the world in white. The pack huddled close. Cale pressed himself among them. Heated bodies surrounded him. The fur scratched his skin, but it was warmth. It was life. He felt a rough tongue swipe across his face, a gesture meant for cubs. His heart hammered, not with fear, but with something else, something that whispered belonging. He remembered his father once telling him humans survive because we adapt. Cale whispered those words in the dark, repeating them like prayer. The predators did not know his tongue, yet they understood his tone of persistence. They had not killed him. He was becoming part of them. Beyond this world, other boys were scattered into other nests, some into swamps, some into deserts, some into caverns of fire. Their cries were unheard, their fates uncertain. But for Cale, the path had begun. The Dominion wanted data. They would return to measure his life, his mind, his body. They would watch from afar, calculating how long until the experiment ended for them. It was numbers. For Cale, it was breath and blood and the sound of wolves in his dreams. The first moon he spent on HFY changed him. His face grew lean, his eyes sharpened his body. Though small, moved with cautious precision. He no longer stumbled in snow, but stepped where the pack stepped. He learned to crouch to silence, his breathing to mimic the shadows the predators tested him, nipping at his heels, driving him to run. He fell, he bled. He rose again, he endured. One night, he sat at the edge of the den, staring into the storm. The alpha joined him, its massive frame lowered to the ground beside. His small one, the beast, exhaled a cloud of mist. Kale placed his hand on the frozen stone between them. He did not touch the beast, yet he felt the presence, the silent acknowledgement. The boy was not prey anymore. The Dominion believed they had dropped a fragile creature into a maw of death. They expected data, a failure. They wanted to prove humanity weak, yet in the heart of the storm, Kale felt the stirring of something else. He was no longer only human. He was cub and predator both. He curled that night, not apart, but pressed between two beasts, their warmth seeping into his bones, his eyes closed, and in the darkness of the cavern. He dreamed not of earth, but of the hunt. He dreamed of running across snow, his breath, white as limbs strong. He dreamed of fangs beside him, and knew that he was theirs as much as they were his. The cavern fell silent, but for the breath of predators and the heartbeat of one small boy, already changing, already become the Dominion, would return. They always returned, but when they came, they would not find the weak child they had abandoned. They would find something else, something they had not expected, something that would not kneel. Kale slept with that thought buried deep like fire and ice, and the predators slept with him, and the world turned waiting for the day when cub and beast would rise together. Kale was 12 when the snow gave way to spring thaw and the rivers burst free from ice. He had grown taller, though lean as bone, and Scar. He moved with the silence of the pack, his steps placed with purpose, his gaze sharp as the claws that sometimes raked against him in trial. He no longer thought himself as a guest or captive. He was a Verrigan spirit, if not in flesh, and the predators treated him as one of their own, though always watched, always measured. The alpha was still master, but Kale had become more than tolerated. He had become necessary. The hunt was a rhythm of life, and Kale thrived within it. He could not match the speed or strength of his companions. So he learned to use what they did not possess. He studied the paths of prey. He stacked rocks in narrow gullies to funnel creatures where the pack could strike. He lashed bone and hide into crude snares that closed around fleeing legs. The pack understood none of craft, but they knew the results. The prey fell quicker, the kills came richer, the growls. Around Kale shifted from suspicion to approval. One hunt marked the true shift. The mammoth beast thundered to the valley, its tusks long enough to pierce 3 bodies. Its cry shook the stones. The pack circled it, snapping, darting, biting. But the beast held strong. Kale moved not with them, but ahead. He studied the cliff and the loose shale at its edge. He scrambled up, his body bruised by falling rocks. He took a branch hardened by frost and wedged it deep into a crack. He pressed with all his strength until the shelf above trembled. The mammoth bellowed again. The pack drove it toward the cliff, and at Kale's final shove of stones collapsed. The beast stumbled, crashing down into the circle of waiting fangs. The kill was theirs not by brute force, but by cunning. The alpha turned to Kale with eyes that glowed in respect, and for the first time Kale howled with the pack, not as mimicry, but as one of them. Seasons passed and scars mapped his skin. Each mark told a lesson, each cut a memory. He carried them as language. He could not write letters yet. He carried history upon his flesh. Kale grew into strength, not raw, but sharpened his shoulders, broadened his hands, hardened into tools. He learned to break bone for marrow, to sew hide for warmth, to craft blades of stone. The pack did not teach him these things, yet their need gave him purpose. He provided, and they accepted. Far away, other boys were enduring their own crucibles. Kale did not know their names nor their faces, but he felt them as if threads bound across worlds. One of them was Darren, a boy placed in the nest of the Serric cliff hunters. Darren had learned to cling to stone with fingers that bled. He learned to drink venom. Without dye, his life was shadow and silence. He was no less changed than Kale, though their paths were different. The Dominion watched them all through. Unseen eyes, their experiment thrived where it should have failed. Kale first saw the Watchers. When he was 14, the night was calm, the snow pale. Under the moons, the pack stirred, uneasy growls rolling from their throats. He followed their gaze to the ridge above. Shapes of metal and light hovered silent. Their eyes glowed red, surveying, calculating the Verric. Snarled, ready to leap, Kale stepped forward, his instincts human and predator colliding. He recognized the danger, not a tooth, but technology. He gave a low warning. Growled, the pack stilled, waiting. The shapes drifted away after a long moment, leaving behind silence and a lingering scent of alien presence. That night Kale lay awake, his mind restless. He realized the truth. The Dominion had not forgotten. They never released their grip. The experiment was not a story finished, but a chain still tied around his neck. They would come again not as shadows, but as harvesters. His chest burned with fury. He pressed his hand to the cold ground beside the sleeping Alpha and whispered words no predator could know, but words heavy with promise: no one will take me. The following years hardened that vow. He trained himself beyond what hunger and cold demanded. He built traps not only for prey, but for invaders. He shaped stone into blades sharper than fangs. He tested poisons drawn from roots and blood. He knew he was preparing for a fight greater than the hunt. The pack saw his restless fire, and they followed his movements, as though sensing the storm ahead. The Alpha grew older, slower, but still powerful. Kale found himself standing at the front, more often guiding the hunt, leading the charge. The line between human and beast blurred until he could no longer name where one ended and the other began. At 17, Kale looked more warrior than boy, his hair tangled in cords of skin, weathered, his eyes glinting like frostlit amber. He spoke rarely in words, instead in growls and signals, yet his mind was sharper than it had ever been. He could imagine battles before they came. He could shape victory before the clash. He was predator perfected through human will. The central conflict of his existence loomed larger with every passing day. He knew he belonged to the Varric, yet he was born of another world. The Dominion had taken him to prove humanity weak, to show humans were nothing without the shaping of beasts. But Kale felt the opposite truth. Each lesson he had stolen from the jaws of death, each trick, each plan, each victory, proved not weakness, but strength. Of Varric had accepted him, but it was his human mind that let him rise. The storm came on the first day of deep winter. The pack returned from a kill when the skies split with light, and the ground trembled. Ships descended black against the pale heavens. The sound was not thunder, but the hum of alien machines. Kale froze the pack, bristled. The air reeked of metal, and heat. The Dominion had come not as shadows, but as masters ready to reclaim what they believed theirs. Kale's chest filled with fire, his hands tightened on the stone spear he carried. He turned to the Alpha, who stood old but unbowed. Their eyes met in silent bond. The message was clear. They would not yield. Kale growled a command, and the pack answered in chorus. The snow swirled around them. The ships opened with shrieks of steel, and the hunters prepared for war. The night closed heavy with tension. Kale stood at the mouth of the cavern, spear in hand, body scarred, eyes burning. He was no longer the boy abandoned in the snow. He was a hunter who had grown teeth of his own, and when the Dominion stepped onto the frozen world, they would not find a cub to cage, but a predator who had chosen his family and who would fight to remain with them. The snow fell in silence. The beast breathed in rhythm. Kale exhaled slowly, whispering to the dark, "They will learn what it means to hunt us." And the storm waited, poised to break. The sky over THRYNN split open with fire. When the Dominion descended, their ships were vast and angular, their hulls etched with the cold geometry of empire. Kale stood with his pack as the snow burned red from their engines. His spear felt small against the roar of machines, but his grip was unshaking. The Varric bristled their fur, standing rigid, their growls vibrating to the frozen air. The moment Kale had long prepared for it come. The soldiers of Dominion emerged faceless in black armor. Their weapons crackled with energy, their steps precise and cold. They moved not as hunters, but as collectors, confident that the world already belonged to them. A voice carried to the snow metallic and cruel returned the subject. They spoke of Kale as though he were an object, a number, not a being. The words ignited a fury inside him deeper than hunger or pain. Kale raised his hand, a silent signal. The Varric spread in a crescent around the intruders, snow shifting under their paws. The Alpha growled deep enough to shake the stone walls of the cabin. The soldiers advanced, weapons raised. Kale let out a sharp cry, half human, half beast, and the pack launched forward. The battle was chaos of fangs against steel spears of light, clashed with claws. Stone cracked under explosions. Kale moved through the storm with feral grace. He struck with spear and knife, and when both broke, he tore a hand hardened by years of survival. His voice rose in howls, answered by his family. The soldiers fought with precision, but they lacked the raw will to endure the tearing fury of predators. A blast struck Kale across the chest. He staggered, the breath ripped from his lungs, pain flared bright. But he refused to fall. The Alpha leapt across him, tearing into the soldier who had fired. Kale pushed himself up, blood freezing against his skin. His mind burned with clarity. The Dominion did not see him as man or wolf. They saw him as specimen. He would show them the mistake of underestimating prey that had learned to hunt. Through the smoke, Kale saw cages lowered from the ships inside. Shadows moved, boys thin, and scarred eyes burning with the same fire that lived in his breath caught. He realized he was not alone. The Dominion had gathered other survivors of nests scattered across alien worlds. Darren was among them. Kale knew, without needing a word, the boy who clung like shadow to the cage bars, eyes sharp and venom bright. He had endured cliffs and poison, and like Kale, he was alive. The soldiers shouted commands, their focus split between containing the pack and guarding the prisoners. Kale's rage sharpened to a single point. He called his family with a growl, pitching command. Varric broke formation, striking at the cage of soldiers, fell torn under claw. And Tooth Kale sprinted through fire, his spears shattered, but his determination unbroken. He reached the bars, his fingers tearing at locks until blood flowed. Darren pushed against the cage with strength born of years of survival. Kale smashed stone against a latch until it cracked. The door fell and Darren stepped free, his body lean, his skin burned with scars. His eyes met Kale's, and in silence they understood they were not enemies. They were brothers of circumstance. More cages fell, more boys released. Each bore the mark of predators that had shaped them. Some bore scaled scars, some carried venomous tattoos on their flesh, some moved with serpentine silence or reptilian strength. None were weak, none were children any longer. The Dominion shouted warnings. They spoke of control, containment of subjects. Kale heard only lies. He turned to Darren and the others. His voice broke rough from disuse, yet carried clear. These are not our masters. We are not their subjects. We are hunters now. The word spread like fire across the snow. The boys answered with growls, with cries, with voices shaped by pain. The predators that had raised them howled in chorus. The Dominion faltered for the first time, their rigid order cracking against the storm. They had unleashed themselves. The battle turned savage. Kale and Darren fought side by side. Darren climbed across the hull of the ship with movements honed on cliffs. His knives glistened with venom stolen from his Sarek kin. He struck with precision, slashing through armor joints. Kale charged below, driving soldiers into traps. He had carved into the earth spears of ice, fell where he had weakened stone. The pack tore through lines relentless. Yet for every soldier that fell, more emerged. The Dominion was endless. Kale knew victory here would not mean safety. They would return again and again, until nothing remained. He looked at Darren, whose chest heaved with exhaustion, yet whose eyes gleamed with the same unbroken fire. The truth struck him hard. They could not merely survive. They had to become more than prey. Resisting, they had to become hunters of the Dominion itself. The soldiers regrouped, forming a wall of steel, and Light, their leader, stepped forward, taller than the rest, armor engraved with marks of command. His voice cut through the storm. You exist because we allowed it. Without us, you would have died in the nests. You are not strong. You are the result of design. Kale stepped forward, blood streaked across his skin. His voice came hoarse, but steady. No, you are wrong. We lived because we refused to die. We endured because you thought we would break. We are not your design. We are your failure. The commander raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the alpha lunged sinking fangs into metal and flesh. The leader fell under the weight of fury. Kale raised his broken spear and drove it down, ending the lie with blood. The soldiers faltered again, their line breaking as fear slipped into their perfect order. The snow quieted for a moment, only the breaths of hunters and the hiss of dying engines filling the air. The surviving soldiers retreated to their ships, dragging their dead. The machines lifted with thunder, fading into the storm above. The Dominion had not been defeated, but they had been blooded for the first time. They had felt fear on this frozen world. Kale stood among the ruins, chest heaving, eyes burning. He turned to Darren, and the others around them, predators, gathered, watching not as masters, but as King. Kale lifted his hand, blood dripping from his palm. His voice was clear. We are no longer alone. We are not theirs. We are ours. The boys answered with cries that shook the mountains. The predators howled beside them. The snow carried the sound across valleys. The world had changed. The Dominion would return, but when they did, they would not face scattered cubs. They would face hunters united. That night, Kale sat with Darren beside the fire, carved from broken ships. They spoke little, for words were clumsy things, yet they shared a bond carved deeper than speech. Both had been stolen, both had endured, both had found family where none should exist. Kale knew the war was far from over, but he also knew this: they were not experiments, they were not subjects, they were the beginning of something the Dominion could not control. The flames cracked. The predators breathed heavy. The boys stared into the dark horizon. Each carried scars of childhood stolen. Yet in those scars burned a truth stronger than steel. The Dominion had sown seeds of survival, but they had harvested rebellion instead. Kale lifted his gaze to the stars above, his voice low enough to be prayer. Let them come, we will hunt them all. And the night held its breath as the future waited, sharp and hungry. The winter sky burned with strange light as Kale stood upon the ridge, his body a map of scars, his eyes cold fire beside the glow of predator. Eyes of Dominion had fled, but they would return. He knew their kind, knew their hunger for order and control. They would not allow rebellion to take root. They would descend with armies, with fire that could consume mountains. Kale felt the weight of the certainty, and yet his heart was steady. He was no longer a child, abandoned in snow. He was a hunter, forged by the wild, and he was not alone. Darren crouched beside him, lean and sharp, the venom of the Sarek running in his blood. His fingers tapped against stone, as if always seeking climb, always ready to strike. He glanced at Kale with eyes that gleamed like knives, and his voice was low and measured. "They will come again, Kale. They will not stop," Kale nodded. "They will come, but we will not wait for them." Around them gathered the others' boys, who were no longer boys hunters grown from nests of fire fawn and claw. Each one bore the mark of survival, etched into bone, and sinew. One had shoulders scaled with the gifts of reptilian. Can another move with the silence of shadow panthers? Another carried poison scars that did not kill him, but made his blood burn. They were different, yet united by the cruelty that sought to break them. They were brothers, not by birth, but by fire. The predators gathered as well. The Varric stood closest to Kale, their fur bristling in the wind. Their howls shook the mountains. The Seric lurked in the heights, their claws gouging stone. Their roars echoed like thunder across valleys. The packs did not mingle easily, yet Kale saw something stirring between them, not rivalry, but recognition. They had all claimed human cubs. They had all seen those cubs rise as hunters. Now they would stand together. Kale felt the moment heavy upon him. The war was no longer about survival. It was not about scraps of meat or shelter from storms. It was about freedom, not just his own, but for every boy stolen, every predator forced into the Dominion's designs. He turned to his brothers, his voice hoarse. "But steady, we cannot wait for them to strike. We must take the hunt to them. The Dominion believes we are still their prey. We must show them we are their predators." Darren's grin was sharp. His voice carried venom and conviction. "I have waited for this hunt my whole life." The others answered with growls and cries. Their fists struck stone. Their voices, carrying across the ridge, the predators howled with them. The alliance was sealed not by treaty or oath, but by shared blood and fury. The first strike came at dawn. They moved against an outpost carved into the cliffs of Dominion Station, built to watch the experiment. Kale led the charge with his pack, racing across snow like shadows of the storm. Darren climbed the walls like a creature born of stone knives flashing with venom. The others descended from above and below, striking with cunning, and forced the predators surge like rivers of tooth and claw. The outpost fell not with quiet efficiency, but with the raw chaos of rebellion. Fire consumed its towers, metal bent under claws. The soldiers fought with discipline, but their weapons failed against the flood of beasts and boys who fought as one. Kale drove his spear through armored chest, his body moving with the rhythm of years in a hunt. He tasted blood and snow in his mouth. He felt the heat of fire cross his skin when the last soldier fell. Silence broke only with the heavy breaths of victors. They found stores of weapons, machines of war, and chains meant for captives. Kale stared at the chains, his chest heavy with memory. He lifted them high before the pack, then hurled them into the fire. His voice cut through the smoke. "We will never wear these again." Victory brought strength, but also warning. The Dominion would see the loss and respond with force. Kale knew this. He welcomed that the rebellion could not hide it, had a blaze across the stars so bright that even Earth would see it. He turned to Darren and the others, his voice low but fierce. "This is only the beginning. We will strike again and again until they understand what they created." The days turned into weeks. The hunters spread their war across the frozen valleys. Each battle hardened them. Each victory drew predators and survivors closer until they were not separate packs, but one army forged in the wild of alien worlds. They moved with the precision of predators, guided by the cunning of men. They struck at supply lines, at garrisons, at landing grounds. Each time, they vanished into the storm before reinforcements could land. The Dominion answered with greater fury. Ships fell like fire from the skies. Armored legions poured across the snow. The ground trembled under their march. Yet Kale and his hunters did not yield. They became the storm itself, striking then vanishing, hunting not for meat, but for vengeance. The climax came when the Dominion brought their full force. To THRYNN, a fleet of warships circled the sky, pouring fire into the mountains. Armies stretched across the horizon. Soldiers marched in endless black. Kale stood before his army of hunters, and Beast's body scarred, his eyes unbroken, his voice thundered across the frozen world. "This is our den. We will not kneel. We will show them the teeth they gave us." The battle shook the planet. Predators charged into lines of steel, their howls louder than engines. Darren climbed ships, cutting wires, severing fuel lines as venom spread. Chaos. Kale led the Varric into the heart of the fight, spears breaking against armor, fists tearing through soldiers. His howl rose above the roar of sound, not of a boy, but of a warlord. The Dominion commander descended clad in armor that gleamed with power. He spoke through a voice of metal. "You were meant to prove human weakness. Instead, you waste our gift." Kale stood, blood dripping, spear broken. His answer was clear. "You gave us nothing. You only showed us who we are." They clashed amid fire, and Storm the commander fought with the might of empire. Kale fought with the fury of years stolen, with the strength of family found. Fangs tore into steel, claws raked across armor. Darren struck from above, driving venom deep. The commander faltered, fell beneath the weight of united hunters. Kale drove his final strike, into the heart of empires, lie the commander fell the fleet above, falter the army below broke. Silence followed a silence, filled with the breath of victory. The snow was red, the sky heavy with smoke. Kale stood upon the broken battlefield daring. Beside him the predators, encircling them brothers scarred, and alive the dominion had been struck a wound deep and unforgettable. Kale raised his voice across the ruin, not to gloat, but to declare we are not subjects, we are not prey, we are hunters, and the stars will know our name. The cry rose from every throat, from man and beast, from scaled and furred, from every survivor. It shook the mountains and rolled into the heavens. The dominion would return, but they would never again find children easy to cage. They would find predators bore their cruelty bound by blood and fury. Kale stood upon the ridge, once more his eyes fixed on the stars. He saw Earth as mine, not as memory, but as destiny. He whispered to Darren, to the pack, to himself, they dropped us to die. Instead we learn to kill, now we rise. The wind carried his words across the snow. The night listened, and the future sharpened like a spear ready for the hunt. Story ***. So it reads as a single finished piece.